So, as many of you know about me, I love poetry. And I particularly love the experience of having a theme or a moment and then finding the perfect poem for that theme or that concept. So I want to share with you all this morning, as we close our month of invitation, this very powerful poem by Marge Piercy called The Low Road. What can they do to you? They can set you up, they can bust you, they can break your fingers, they can burn you. How can you stop them? Alone, you can fight. You can refuse, you can take whatever revenge you can, but they may roll over you. But two people fighting, back to back, can cut through a mob, a snake dancing file. An army can meet an army. Two people can keep each other sane, give support, conviction, love, hope. Three people are a delegation, a committee, a wedge. With four, you can play bridge and start an organization. With six, you can rent a whole house and eat pie for dinner with no seconds. We know how to eat pie around here, don't we? A dozen make a demonstration. 100 fill a hall. 1,000 have solidarity and your own newsletter. 10,000, 100,000 your own media. 10 million your own country. And it goes on, one at a time, each with one invitation. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again, and they say no, and you say we. And each time you say we, you mean one more. Please rise, body your spirit, for our opening song. Nicca Giovanni wrote, "We love because it is the only true adventure. The only true adventure is to love." Let our lives be a song for love, a song we sing to the lonely, to the grieving, the wounded, the threatened, the forgotten. Let our lives be a song of gratitude. Gratitude for the teachings of our ancestors. Gratitude for the fields as they turn from green to brown. Gratitude for the eagle and the fading sunflower. From this gratitude, may we fill our reservoir with strength and resilience. May courage and wisdom seep out from us into this world. May creativity and compassion continue to unfold in unexpected ways. May the cave of the heart be our point of origin and our refuge. Bless this world, bless all beings, bruised and healing and whole. There is a love beyond our knowing, holding all that we love. May we rest in this love.
One early June evening 14 years ago, I walked under the sally port of a huge brick edifice in Auburn, New York, that looks like a medieval fortress, and indeed it was first built by convict labor in 1821, under coils of razor wire with gun turrets at regular intervals along the enormous solid concrete wall that walls in 2 square miles of space and 2,000 inmates. I was to begin what would be a 14-year sentence facilitating a poetry workshop for inmates. And indeed, this is Auburn Correctional Facility, a maximum security men's prison. Although I anticipated a life sentence, I did decide to accept early release for personal reasons, wanting to shift my focus to some other neglected activities, and also to write a memoir on my experiences, which I am now doing. Those of you who remember me know that I am a published poet, but this is my first manuscript of that type. Every Monday night, except for holidays and vacations, for all those years, I would enter the ugly, paint-peeling, dismal classroom with the leaky ceiling and eagerly await my inmate poets as they began to trickle in as each cell block was released, and they'd come up to me smiling broadly, giving me high fives or fist bumps or hugs, which eventually we were forbidden to exchange, carrying folders and notebooks stuffed with paper, full of poems, essays, short stories, even indeed entire novels, which they had written, most of these men having received absolutely no formal education of any length or worth, and yet remarkably self-taught. In a group sometimes as small as 4 or 5, up to very rarely as many as 18 or 20, and this was always when we had special guests, of course, kind of like at church, you know how that is, but averaging usually about 11 or 12 men. We would gather for an hour and a half, and we'd do what we called rock and roll, and this was open mic, oral presentations of their original works, often followed by feedback, and this, I always like to say, was the most supportive writers group I have ever been in anywhere. I would conduct writing exercises, which were a lot of fun, and that would involve each group or individual presenting a piece and performing also, sort of like a little skit, performing that piece as well. And we did have, off and on, we did have special guests. We often had lessons which would be given by myself on topics like haiku, and sometimes one of the inmates would also ask to give a presentation on something that he had studied about. Their work was and is, because it still goes on, absolutely extraordinary, drawing upon hip-hop and rap and rhyme for its roots often, and yet leaping beyond the commercial trappings of those forms and leaping into sheer talent. I can't begin to describe it. No recordings were allowed or anything like that. You just have to kind of use your imagination. And there would be heartbreaking rage and despair, and yet transmuting into hope and joy, full of playful energy as much as sometimes, of course, dark imagery. But more important, in retrospect, I realized that we exchanged more than poems, and what I already knew because I had taught previously in the college program in a medium security prison in Moravia, that stereotypes we hold about inmates are not always by any means true, and in fact need to be let go of entirely. What we exchanged more than poems was friendship, truly, and friendships with each other. We see movies where inmates are knifing each other and there are gang fights and all of this stuff. In this group, inmates, mostly black men, but some white, were very good friends with each other, very supportive and caring. A great deal of respect, loyalty. One guy said to me, I really want to transfer to another facility where I might be closer to my family, where I might have more opportunities for education, and I'm staying because of Monday nights. We called it, not very creatively, the Monday night poetry workshop. And then we would do a Saturday Night Live thing where we would say, it's Monday, we're in Auburn, and it's Monday nights. We go like this. And if I would forget to do that, they would remind me that I needed to do that. It's Monday nights. Support, encouragement, compassion, and indeed, love. This experience, which in many ways has been the defining one of my life, my life's work to date, if you will, in large measure has taught me so much. Working with these men, most of them under 30, a few elders, and in the discussion afterwards, please do stay because there's lots more I could say, a few elders, but many under 30, men of color, almost exclusively from 4 boroughs of New York City, and what that means is, you know, not Manhattan. Raised in poverty, overshadowed by drug abuse and drug trafficking, victimized by police and the courts, and now inside, at times, by corrections office. What I learned was that, bottom line, we are all the same. When everything is stripped away, which is what prison does to someone, we learn that what we all want is recognition, respect, human connection, and more importantly, a voice. I am going to read you now a couple of poems that I wrote on my experiences, and then I'm going to read you a few of the inmates' poems. And then please do stay for discussion, question and answer, and all of that, because I could go on, you know, literally for hours. I also have had the privilege of editing and arranging to have published their works. And they are on the table, except for the titles that are currently being reprinted, which is nice. Then I am out of them. So I'll explain later how you could get some of those later. This poem is entitled, "In Attica, There Are No Trees," for the inmate whose story this is. Without leaf flight, a man counts years, no lazy sunlit spiral, no storm wet heft, until at last one late October day, a wild wind carries over the wall from the hidden wood that stands beyond the prison perimeter a few ragtag remnants of summer's fall. Pressing his face as if to crusts in famine against the crackly scraps so dry yet redolent of crumbled earth, the man becomes the boy, remembering twilight, hard play, the city park dirt poor yet circled by ancient guardians, sycamores keeping watch. And the young man who told me this story and absolutely refused to write it himself, so that I felt that I had to, of course, had grown up in the city, found himself inside Attica, where indeed there are no trees, and then in Auburn. The yard inside Auburn prison did have trees and lawn, and a warden's house with the warden's family actually was there inside. But in the 1970s, those trees were razed to the ground and an asphalt yard was formed. So inside Auburn, there are no trees. So I wrote this for him, and he said that was one of the very hardest things. There are also no stars because the sodium arc security lights blank out the moon. A full moon can be seen, but no stars. We don't think of these things. We think of other things, you know, about prison, which of course are hard too. Now, this poem, also written by me, describes my experience when I was very first coming in, and the first line is the title. Some nights like this start out mild, stirred with the scent of earth, rising somehow over razor wire from the creek that runs along the cement cliffs that wall in this city of trouble, city of pain. When you walk out of the main building from the command post into a corridor that leads through an iron-gated passage into the yard, it smells just like anybody's dinner cooking, homely, hamburger with onion, maybe. And Marge, the CO who escorts you over, sneaks a smoke crossing the yard on the way to the school, where weekly you and your caged poets struggle to learn what is the weight language can bear. By the guard's hut, Marge hands off the butt to her buddy, then, just so she can brag, pulls out of her ID wallet the hospital photo of her newborn granddaughter. The baby's got spiky black hair, face like an old apple. And she's still smiling, that milky smile. Her eyes are not yet opened. And that really happened to me. I changed the CO's name. There are very few female COs. And when that happened, I knew that I had arrived because the guards, especially at the beginning, were very standoffish and most unwelcoming and unhelpful to me and other volunteers, although Marge was actually pretty nice. And then they didn't interact with us in any familial way when she showed me that photograph, and I'd been buttering her up for several weeks, you know, and being real nice to her. When she showed me that picture, okay, you know, she's respecting who I am and what I'm doing. I mentioned the publishing. I did have the very, very great privilege with an enormous amount of hard work to put out this anthology called Doing Time to Cleanse My Mind, an anthology from the Inmates Poetry Workshop of Auburn Correctional Facility, 2001 to 2009. Now, the program went up to this past June, so there's lots more poems that are not in a book. But this was put out by my publisher, which is Foothills, a small independent press down near Elmira. And I had to bring a co-editor, a fellow poet, on board who had visited my class a number of times because it was so much work. But anyway, this very beautiful book is being reprinted right now, and if you sign up the email list, I can let you know when it would be available, and I would sign it on behalf of the poets who cannot sign it. I'm going to read you one from a young man who came from Rochester. Most of the inmates came from New York City. It is policy, at least in New York State, to incarcerate inmates away from where they're from. And this is so their families cannot visit them. I think this is a bad policy. The reason given is so contraband can't be brought in, and I understand that that is a factor, but I would weigh other factors too. But this young man came from Rochester, and there were only a few that I encountered. Most from Rochester would go to Attica, which is indeed an hour from Rochester. So all of this is sort of an Alice in Wonderland kind of thing, you know, that never jammed today. You can't, there's no logic, you can't figure it out. Okay, Omega Poet wrote this. I found that most of the members of my group had a government name, that's what they would call it, and a poet's name. And so Omega Poet chose that name. Optical illusions. Being a black poet is like going over Niagara Falls in a barrel. An 8-year-old can do what you do unaided. The barrel maker doesn't think you can cut it. The gawkers on the bridge hope you fall on your face. The tourist bus full of paying customers broke down just outside of the ghetto. Some would rather analyze postcards than catch your art. A mile from the brink, it begins to storm. But what really hurts is that you're bigger than the barrel. Yeah, isn't that great? And he showed this to me, and I said, Omega, that is brilliant. And he said, it is? You know, they often didn't know how good they were. But I would tell them all the time. Captured and Convicted. This is by a man named Jalil Muntaqim, who helped me from the very beginning with the program, and then very, very, very long story, ended up, he was extradited to California for a while. Luckily that fell through because they were bogus charges, and he is now in Attica. And Jalil is one of the longest held political prisoners in US history. He does have a website, I can give it to you later. I am very privileged to be his friend. He is a former Black Panther who was caught up in COINTELPRO. If you don't know what that is, I'll tell you later. You need to know. He wrote this, Captured and Convicted. When in the embrace of hell, I can't dispel the tales of life that is full of strife. But my heart rises to the occasion, building in stages the need to be courageous, to face another day, holding back rage. Today, they said, ain't no way we can say you'll leave this stay. Your life is of no consequence because you're convicted. They don't care. Life still has meaning for the living. I can't help my innocence was not proven. The presumption of guilt continues to linger like vultures and buzzards hovering over my life, skywriting my demise in the name of justice. Captured and convicted, my life has been afflicted. My days are restricted by movements, by bells and steel cells, clang and bang under gun towers, hours wane. 365 times 30, 24, 7. I know there's a heaven, but it's hard to find a peace of mind in this hell, doing time, doing time, doing time. And that imagery brings us to the title of this book, which is not from Jalil's poem. It's from another poem I'm going to read you. But you can see that that phrase, doing time, to a poet takes on multiple metaphorical meanings and is often expressed. So the title poem, the title of the book, the title poem, is also the last poem in the book, and the last one I'll read today. And this is prefaced by a very brief story. Poem was written by Nathan Wheelings, Nate, one of my very most favorites. He was in the original group that we started with. Nate was 19, and he had been, when I met him, he had been incarcerated since he was 13 years old. He was illiterate. He was later self-taught with books his lawyer, who happened to be a woman, had given him. The very first night poetry workshop was ever held, he sat in the back row of the classroom. His back was pressed right against the wall there. He was a little nervous, but quietly writing this poem. He wrote it from beginning to end with no revision that night in that classroom, and then at the very end, he brought it up to me. And I could tell you lots more stories about Nate, who had an entire manuscript of poems his mother was trying to publish for him. And about a year later, Nate maxed out his sentence and went home. And thank goodness I have not seen him back there. You know, there's a lot of recidivism. So I'm going to read this, and at the very end of the poem, there's kind of a description of the physical setting there. So you'll know that there's a kind of a metaphor, but it describes what it looked like. Doing time to cleanse my mind. Doing time to cleanse my mind from all the evils of mankind. I've transferred from a slow wit into an educated black poet, Once trapped inside an old, no-good, crime-infested neighborhood called Old Rockaway, doing time to cleanse my mind from all the evils of mankind, I've learned to stay away from negativity and live my life righteously as I share my heart through the precious arts of poetry. Doing time to cleanse my mind from all the evils of mankind in a classroom at the far end of a long hallway. It touched my heart to know some people aren't afraid to teach someone so close but far away. Thank you.
And let no one stand alone. And say it with me. We extinguish this flame, but not to light the truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. So in peace.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.